Now, South Sudan has shut down its oil production to protest Sudan's seizure of its oil shipments. The row heated up this month when Sudan said it confiscated some oil from South Sudan to make up for what it calls unpaid fees. The dispute centers on how much South Sudan should pay to send its oil through Sudan to port at the Red Sea. The presidents of the two nations met last week on sidelines of the Africa Union Summit in Ethiopia, but their negotiations failed. For more, we are now joined by Mr. Deng Deng Nyal, Deputy Head of Mission for the South Sudan Embassy here in Washington, D.C. Now, Mr. Nyal, first, would you say this was a conflict in waiting over the years, even as you were struggling to get independence?
What I would say is that the relationship between the SPLM and the NCP has been a rocky relationship, given the fact that the provisions within the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, we really had a very bumpy road. And in terms of the oil, we kind of did not expect that to happen, because looking at South Sudan and North Sudan, both of us are dependent on the oil. 2008. Republic of South Sudan revenue was 98%, and for the Republic of Sudan was 95%. But because of the outright, theft of our oil entitlement for the Republic of South Sudan, worth 815,520 euros, that led to the shutdown in the production of oil.
Now, what are the options you have on the table? How do you survive? This is a new economy with so many challenges. You want to build the economy, and yet you cannot sell your oil now. What are your options?
Our president has issued a statement, even though the government did not declare how much money that the government of South Sudan has in foreign cash reserve. However, the government is working on a plan, a short-term plan and a long-term plan, how to manage this crisis, because I understand how we're gonna, when we lose this revenue, to manage the economy. So the government and the Minister of Finance has been tasked of finding ways how we can have a solution for short-term and long-term. But also there is the option, of course, as you have heard already, the agreement with the Republic of Kenya in order to build a pipeline to Port Lamu.
Now, that's a long-term plan, of course, yes. But in the short term, we know that Sudan, the north part of that country, is doing business with the private companies. How are you handling this from that front, from the companies that are doing business from the government of Khartoum?
Well, I mean, the businesses doing government of business in Khartoum, they have the right to do that, but we also have many U.S. companies that are now interested because of the sanctions that have been lifted. So there's been a lot of influx of U.S. companies that want to engage in the oil industry. So even for the short term, we want to go ahead and build micro refineries. And instead of waiting for a long-term, 3 years to 4 years to build a pipeline, but micro refineries in order to satisfy the domestic demand of oil.
Mm-hmm. So at the moment, if we may also look at another situation in Southern Sudan, you also have internal strife, different tribes fighting each other. How is the government dealing with these two conflicts now? This is an international conflict with a neighbor, and there is the local situation.
Yes, the issue of the conflict in Jonglei, and also several years back, the conflict that exists between the ethnic tribe is because of the militarization. During the war, the SPLA has militarized the peasants and the communities in order to defend themselves. So now the government has to go in order to disarm the civilians that have these arms. But of course, it has a long-term plan. It's not just about disarmament alone, but we need to work on, the government is now working on a deployment of the SPLA troops and also the law enforcement, but we still need help in the capacity of the mobility of the forces. And during the rainy season, it's very difficult to move. Therefore, there has to be a permanent solution, and the government is working on that with the assistance of the international community.
During the struggle for independence, you looked so united. The Southern Sudanese looked like just the children of one mother. What went wrong, or was there something that you hadn't thought about?
Well, these are the challenges of nation building. I mean, if we look at many countries some of the countries have gone through civil war. Even the United States was the 13 colonies. The struggle is there, and those are basically the challenges of the nation building, that we have to establish the institutions. So we're not really surprised that these things are happening, but the government has to go in and try to work on sustainable economic development. The conference will exist because we have there's extreme poverty in the rural areas. And Dr. John once mentioned the issue of bringing the towns to the people. So the development is a long-term process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyal. That's Mr. Niel, Deng Deng Niel, the Deputy Head of Mission Embassy of South Sudan here in Washington, D.C.